Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third session in this webinar series on urban ecology. So this is part of a exhibit which is being held at the IHS library in IHS Bangalore office. And this is revolving around the theme of urban ecology. It basically is trying to explore different aspects of ecology which people study in the middle of cities or different urban settings. So this exhibition is open for a while, and any people who are interested can definitely drop in and take a look at the exhibits which have been arranged. So as part of this, we have also sort of curated a series of talks by early career researchers who have been working on very interesting aspects of ecology in urban habitats. So after the two previous talks, now in the third talk, I'm very happy to invite Dr. Anuradha Batabyal. And she's a professor, she's an assistant professor in Flame University, and she basically studies behavior. But this behavior, she studies in very different organisms, and which one of them is a reptile and one of them is a snail. And she has carried out these studies in two very different geographical regions. And she explores a lot of interesting concepts in behavior and also links these to the ecology of the species. So this is in some sense, what do you say, a good sort of combination of different approaches in urban ecological studies which people are carrying out. And yes, so again, like our previous sessions, this talk will be there for 40 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. In between, if any of the audience have any questions, you can ask them in the Q&A box. So, Anuradha, over to you.
Thank you, Mihir. Thanks so much. And also Vinita, Mansi, and all of the people from IIHS and NCPS, all of you who have organized this. It's a really wonderful series that you're doing on urban ecology. And I'm really happy and grateful that you've invited me to be a part of it. I'll start off by sharing my screen. Hey, Mihir, let me know if it's on the full screen mode.
Yes, it is.
It's on the okay. Thank you so much. So Mihir has already introduced myself. I also wanted to tell you that he has been my senior during my master's, so we have known each other, and it's really wonderful that he invited me for this. So today, as he has already sort of told you, that I'll try to tell you a short story about these two different systems that I have studied across two very different landscapes. Now, whenever we think of nature or biodiversity, what comes into our mind is something like this: very pristine nature, the wilderness. And these are also some of the kind of imagination that some of us ecologists had when we started off maybe in this field, which has brought us, inspired us to try and understand the mysteries that lie in these beautiful landscapes and all the animals, the flora and fauna that are found around these places. But what we are faced with right now is something like this. And that's the reality, that all of these landscapes are shifting rapidly and dynamically. It's happening very fast at a very fast scale, because as human beings, we have tried to change this landscape, and urbanization is one of the major factors that is causing these changes in the landscape. So with us and the animals and plants which live, they all have to adapt to these changes. And urban ecology, the word in itself, talks about the system where the wildlife as well as us as humans, we are a part of it. It's not that we are separated out, and that's what I believe. So I was interested in actually studying some of the systems in this urban landscape or urban space and this kind of an ecosystem. So when I started my PhD journey, it was at the city of Bangalore, in Indian Institute of Sciences. And in and around the city of Bangalore, actually, you will see these very different kind of landscape. So once I go out, there will be all of these rocky hills, and which are like a little bit barren, just at the periphery of the city. And there are also these suburban spaces. And Bangalore, as we all know, has been expanding rapidly. So these are some of the photos from like 12 years back. But I'm sorry, sometimes my light can go on and off. But hopefully, yeah, my screen is working. So the city actually looks somewhat like this, which you see on the right-hand side. And when I started off with my PhD, I had no idea what kind of system I would like to work on. So when I was exploring this landscape in and around, I found these lizards, which you see inside the city as well as in these sort of wild landscapes or the rocky outcrops that are present just outside the city. And these lizards are called the rock agamas. So they love the rocks, as the name suggests. So these are some of my photos from on field. So I started going to the field and first just look at these lizards, which really were very attractive to me. So what you see in the middle of your screen is a female. Let me just use the laser. Okay, so this is a female, and as you can see, she's like super camouflaged. She's camouflaged really well in the background. And these are the males. Okay, so when I saw them just there, what the first thought that comes to mind is that, oh, they are all in these different color forms, as you can see, that this male is like black and orange, and this one is yellow and orange. So I started to like sort of look at the literature, try to understand that, okay, do these lizards change color or anything? And at that point in time, when I started my PhD, there was no idea that these rock agamas can change color. What we knew till that time was if somebody asked me which lizards change color, I think universally all of us here would say that chameleons do, because we have studied it across in schools and college everywhere. They're very famous in changing colors, but nothing about any other lizard species. So that gave me that thought that, okay, maybe these lizards might be able to change their colors. And that's where I started off my PhD from. So I looked at these lizards, brought them in the lab, and started to look at why or how they might be changing these colors. So the first thought that came to mind was, do they do it to hide from predators? Or they can do it to communicate, because animals use colors in different ways. So sometimes they can use their colors to communicate to each other, or they can hide from either predators, or they might hide to catch their prey, like all these tigers, leopards, they have these camouflaging patterns that we all know. They'll hide in the surroundings to attack their prey. But what I saw was that these lizards, they would start sort of changing their colors. And let me try and play this video. Okay, yes. So as you see, if you look at this male, he started to change from being yellow and orange. So his back is changing, as you will see, its dorsal part. It's slowly turning to be very black on its lateral side and dark, like reddish on the back. So whenever he sees a female, he changes to those colors. And when he's with another male and he's fighting, he's in this orange and yellow form. So that was what sort of we found the first time, that some other lizard species other than chameleons can change their colors, which was super fascinating at that point in time to find, because we knew nothing about these systems. And India in itself, not just this lizard species, but there are lots of agamids, that family of lizards, which are very similar to these ones. And lots of them actually can change their colors. And right now we have been working on multiple of these systems. And in ISC, there is a lab, Maria's lab. She works on a lot of those things as well. So what we found was that during these male-male encounters, these lizards would look like this. The back would be yellow, the sides would be orange, and during the male-female ones, they'll turn black and red. So the colors would shift, and it would happen very fast at like a super speed. But we could see those. Okay, I can see a lizard changing from yellow to red, but how do I actually also know that whether the lizards can see those colors? Because in the animal kingdom, it is not that what we observe is the same thing that those animals do. They have very different eyesights as well. So they have very different kinds of cone cells, rod cells, what colors they see. Like some can see UV, as these lizards can also do. So there are these different measures. So we have to understand whether it is important for them and what are they using it for. And now with the landscape being changing, is it sort of altering any of these abilities in these systems? So then we got this measure, like sort of a machine which measures color, and it is called a color spectrometer, which sort of measures colors in wavelength. We all know that colors are made up of all of these different wavelengths, like white light is made up of all the color wavelengths. So these lizards they go from that range of yellow to orange, which are all like in towards the longer wavelengths. And this machine, what it does is it sort of shines a light on the back of the animal and it measures the exact amount of that color in terms of wavelength. And then we do a bunch of other sort of modeling with considering the eyesight of these lizards, what kind of cone cells these animals have and how they would perceive these colors, and then try to look at these objectively, not from the perspective of how we see it, but from the perspective of the lizards, how they see each other. Okay? So we tried measuring those and we would attach this in the lab and the lizards would roam around and change colors, even with the small backpack being attached on them. So suppose now I have, what I'll show you is basically on this x-axis on this graph is the wavelength. So it starts from, you will see that it will start peaking up. So these lines, they will be higher towards the longer wavelengths, towards 600, 700s, because it is orange or like reddish orange color. And these are the percentage reflectance, that how much light is being reflected at that wavelength. So what we see is that their dorsal colors, it turns like brighter and brighter red. Okay, that's why the graph is going up. And on the lateral side, because it is turning black, it's going down and down. So everything is getting absorbed. So all of these kinds of graphs we were measuring by using that instrument. During male-male interactions, as you see here, the dorsal part is kind of yellow, so they don't change much from their neutral state. So the neutral state is kind of very fudgy, sort of a yellowish brown color, which they use to match their background. And then the lateral part is again becoming orange, so it's becoming brighter. Okay. Now these lizards can also have UV. So what you see on this yellow lizard's back, these white spots. The white spots also reflect UV, but at the time when I was doing my PhD, we did not have the machinery to measure UV. Right now, we have got some UV cameras, so we can also see that the lizards also display UV. Now, we knew that, okay, these lizards are changing color. They have this really beautiful and a new thing that hasn't been studied till that time. And they are found in urban and these rural landscapes, which are not disturbed at all. So what my PhD was about was to understand how these two different populations, which some lizards which live in the city versus some which live outside in these natural landscapes in the wilderness, which have no human disturbance, how are they different and how are they adapting to this change in their landscape? So in terms of their color, what we find was that, so what you see here is a chromatic contrast. What it means is that the color contrast, very plain and simple. How contrasting is an orange against a black or a yellow against a blue background. It is just that. How bright does it look at? What's the contrast like? And we all know, we all adjust our contrasts in our phones all the time for all our photos, right? So the lizards are also looking at these contrasts because they use the color to communicate. So they have to stand out from their background. And the brighter they are, the more they stand out, the better they can communicate over longer distances, maybe. The colors also, in a lot of cases, signify the health of the animal. And that is what they try to convey. So all of these reds, orange, they sort of get these things from their food. So if some lizard is eating great food, then it will be much more brighter. It has the capacity to become brighter. So those are very important things. And that's why we try to compare these color contrasts from these rural and urban populations. And what we see is that the rural males, they are much more higher in their contrast than the urban males during their male-female or the courtship colors, which you saw was orange and black. And to be very simply put, is that the rural males, they are much more redder in shade than the urban males, which cannot turn that red. They are mostly in their yellowish orange, that color. They do not go till the red. Now, it can either be that these rural males, they have the capacity to go there and the urban males don't. Or also it can be that the urban males have other kinds of stressors which sort of manipulate that color change, and it is not able to achieve those colors in that landscape. So we saw this in terms of coloration and communication, how urban and rural animals of the same species, these individuals show very different sort of behaviors and physiology. Now, moving from colors, I also wanted to sort of look at other things which comes to actually change these colors or help organisms to change colors and also work in other kinds of physiological state. So at that time, I was also interested in reading lots of books, and this was a very famous author, and he's also one of like very famous scientists. He's a neuroendocrinologist, and so his name is Robert Sapolsky. So he wrote this wonderful book, which is called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. So a very interesting title. And we all would wonder, okay, why, yeah, seriously, why do zebras not get ulcers when we do, right? So he started off by talking about stress and how, if you think of the life of a zebra, of course, it's stressful. It's out in the wild and it's being chased by maybe lions. So it has to run, definitely stressful for it, right? But some bit of stress is actually good for animals. And all wild animals, they are faced with these sort of episodic stressors in their day-to-day lives. And it is good because stress is actually a response, a physiological response that helps us in adapting and it helps us in survival. So all living creatures, slight bit of stress is actually good for you. But what happens for us, most of the cases that Robert Sapolsky was describing in this book, is that we are faced with these chronic stressors. So all our lives are faced with multiple kinds of urban stressors, especially as we are advancing in terms of technology, be it any of these things, our stressors are actually increasing, if you see. When human beings started off as we have evolved with time, all the sort of stress-related diseases have started to be much more prevalent in these times. So these chronic stresses are not very good for our health, and that is why we get ulcers. So they are stress-modulated ulcers, which we as humans get. We also get anxiety, stress, depression, all sorts of things, right? Now, in terms of animals also right now, what is happening is they are not in their wild habitats, and they are facing these exact same kinds of stressors that an urban landscape or urban life is giving them. So we started to also understand and try to measure these stressors in our lizards because they are also now in the wild habitats as well as in urban spaces. So what kind of stressors do they face and how do they respond to it? To understand that, we looked at one of these hormones, which we also have in our bodies. It's the corticosterol. And that's what they have. We have something which is called cortisol. Same thing. These help us. The hormone is not just for stressor, but it is a very basic metabolic hormone that we all have. And corticosterol functions in multiple ways in our bodies. It helps us in maintaining our basic homeostasis and in our glucose metabolism, protein, all of these things. But in some of these systems, when we get high stress, our corticosterol levels or cortisol levels also increase. And then it slowly comes down. But if we are faced with a very long-term stress, then it can completely elevate and change these axes and the stress levels in all animals or our bodies. So when we measured this, we measured it in situations when these animals are going through their social interactions. So even social interactions are stressful, okay? It's not that when animals are interacting with each other, it's always in harmony and there is no stress. The hormones also do spike up because whenever we are interacting with anything, be it predators, be it social interaction, we need energy, right? Even when we are interacting with each other, right now I'm speaking to you, I need energy to speak. My mind is like working constantly to understand, okay, what would I say in the next slide? So I require that glucose. So my body is trying to modulate that and sort of give me that glucose. So my cort levels right now are actually high, okay? So that's why the animals also, when they're interacting, their corticosterol do spike up. But if I am not doing anything, okay, I am at rest, then if I measure my corticosterone or cortisol levels, I would know what is my baseline like. And then if I compare it with somebody else from somewhere else, and we have maybe similar kinds of lifestyle and everything, then we would know that, okay, am I already at an elevated level? Am I a stressful individual? I have a chronic stress or not? So that same way, we compared it with rural and urban males. These lizards, their baseline stress level. So at rest, when they are not doing anything, what is their stress levels like? And we saw that the urban stress level was higher. So these triangles, the yellow triangles are the urban males, and they are at rest here. So they are much more higher than the ones in the rural landscape. And even when they are going through a social interaction, so after a social interaction, we would measure their stress levels after every like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes at an interval. We see that they don't really change much. So the rural males, they are actually fine. Like they don't get stressed so much even after a social interaction. But if I see an urban male, his stress levels sort of spike up, as you will see here. These straight lines with these yellow triangles, they kind of spike up and then come down after a point. And it's the exact same thing that happens in male-male interaction. So in both sort of social interactions, these animals show the same pattern of stress. And the urban ones are always at a higher stress level. So their baseline is higher, as well as they increase their stress hormones when they are going through any interaction. Okay. Now, this sort of leads us to talk about something which at that point in time, I wasn't very sure of, but then slowly I started finding examples of these, that the urban lizards, why are they actually at a higher stress level, and why do they like sort of spike up much more and the rural ones don't? How can the rural lizards be like, okay, they don't spike up at all? So what we started seeing is these two different kinds of, we say, coping styles or social strategies that these animals are adopting. Because what has happened now is that the landscapes have completely changed. In the rural landscapes, these lizards occupy like large areas. Okay, so they will have a big territory, they defend a big home, basically. So there are these single males, they will occupy a big territory, they will defend it. So they are fighting with other males to defend that territory. They are always interacting with females. But in the urban landscape, the space is less, right? What happens here is in the city, they are all like sort of stuck in these small pockets, where they can survive, where there is some space, some little bit of rocks and vegetation and loose soil where they may be able to lay their eggs. So they're stuck in these small pockets. So their density is very high in these smaller areas, and all their territories are overlapping with each other. So now it is like, I have a very small space, I live with my neighbor, and I have to tolerate that neighbor, even if I don't like. So I cannot keep fighting all the time, right? And I cannot keep my stress levels being high all the time also. So what has happened in this landscape is that we also measured another hormone, which I didn't show you, which is the testosterone. So both of these sort of function, the testosterone and the corticosterone, they function in the social interactions. And whenever lizards are actually fighting, their testosterones also go high up in the males especially. So what happens in these urban landscapes is that animals become something which is called a reactive phenotype, where they are much more shy and docile. They are not that aggressive. They are not always fighting. Also because their stress levels are higher for other reasons, maybe for their resource, their space use, lots of other. Maybe there are some other artificial and like non-native predators that are introduced, like feral dogs and cats, which attack them. So for a lot of different things, their stress levels are already high. And the corticosterone and testosterone work in like sort of trade-off. So if one goes up, the other cannot go up that much, it goes down. So because their corticosterones are really high, the testosterones cannot go up that much. And these lizards, they need that to be like super active and be bold and go fight and all of these things. But they are not doing that here in the urban space, because they're kind of tolerating having a different kind of strategy or a reactive phenotype. And in the earth and sort of in the wild, in the natural landscapes, these animals show something which is called a proactive phenotype, where yes, they have their big territories, they defend, they will fight, they have high testo. So their court is low because they have to maintain a higher testo to actually defend their territories, fight, mate with the females, because they have to like sort of have better courtship strategies than the neighboring male to attract the females. So all sorts of things that's going on. So these are shifting these sort of phenotypes of these animals, and they are becoming slightly different than their natural or wild counterparts. And it is not just true for this specific species. Right now, lots of studies are being done across systems, like in fishes, in birds, lizards, where people are actually finding this pattern that urban animals are shifting towards a certain kind of phenotype. They are becoming slightly different. But are they becoming all the same? Now, we know that diversity is really important for survival, for adapting to changes, right? And it's actually concerning that if most of these urban animals are now becoming similar slowly, uh, are we sort of narrowing down on that diversity? And that's a point to think about and to understand that, okay, how many of these systems are actually doing this or showing this kind of a behavior? So it was very interesting that time. This is the final part of the lizard study that I will be talking about today, and then we'll move on slightly to look at snails. So these are like lizards, they have to survive in an urban landscape. So animals also require very good learning abilities because you have to sort of navigate this space, which is very dynamic. It is changing all the time. So your orientation, where it's safe, where it is unsafe, all of these things you have to figure out in a landscape. So we also looked at their learning abilities, how fast they learn. So what I did was something I just thought of showing you a funny, like sort of an animated thing. So it's just an animation of how we conduct the experiment. So this is a big arena where there are two refuges. One is safe, one is unsafe. As it happens in actually the setting in urban space or any rural space also. Something might be safe, something might not be safe. So the animal has to understand where to go and hide. And it has some cues in the landscape. So there is like a box, like the red square, which is fixed on top of the safe refuge, just for the lizard to give some orientation of the space. Okay. So I will do something which is called a predator attack. So I will tap the tail of the lizard slightly with a brush, like a paintbrush, and the lizard thinks it's something attacking. So it will run, and it might run to any of these. If it runs to the unsafe, I will again attack it until it runs into the safe one. So I will keep training this animal to try and make it understand that, okay, once it goes into the safe, then it is not attacked. So it associates and it understands that, okay, something in the landscape is safe right now for it. So we did this experiment with these urban males, rural males. And what we found was that learning happens very fast in the urban males than the rural ones. So the urban ones are these red triangles, and they sort of, so this is the latency to choose safe refuge, which I've plotted on the y-axis, which means that how much time you take to choose. And slowly you are better and better. So you're very fast in choosing the safe, okay, after a time point. The rural ones, which are these black ones, they take longer time. So that's why the graph is at a higher level here. But then I have something which is called a reverse learning, which is nothing but I just switch the safe and unsafe. That's all. Okay. Now, what was safe yesterday is not safe anymore today. That's what I do with the lizards to little bit slightly mess up their mind. And it is very important if you think that in the urban landscape, which is always changing, right? So the animals have to understand something might be safe today. The plot was empty, nothing was there, but suddenly maybe lots of people come in, they start building a big building in that plot, which is always happening in Bangalore all the time. All the plots these days are getting taken over, and there's a building coming up somewhere. So the lizards also need to know that, okay, this was my home yesterday, but today it has changed and it is not safe anymore for me. So they have to also learn that. And that's a very important skill, which is called reversal learning. So I unlearn something and I learn something new on top of it. And that gives my brain, it's a behavioral flexibility that I observe. And the urban lizards, they are actually smarter. Okay. So they can learn faster and they can also reverse learn, because that is very important for them to survive in this landscape. So this environmental complexity drives these cognitive abilities in these systems, okay? So we see that, yes, the urban lizards are actually good in a lot of ways. And so after that work, a lot of these studies came up, like there were some which, so how urban lizards are changing their lifestyle to make cities their homes. That's what was covered in mint. And along with that, there was another work which was done from the lab about what kind of landscape, what kind of habitat are actually important for these lizards, whether it's the rocks, whether it is the vegetation cover, water bodies, what is important for these animals to survive in the city. And what we found was that most of the times the rocky landscape is what they are absolutely looking for. So rocks are very important for them because they need them for basking. But I would say also like loose soil is very important because that's how they would lay their eggs in. Otherwise, they cannot dig and lay their eggs and put those down. So there are multiple aspects of a city that are important for an urban fauna to survive in that space. And every system has a slightly different requirement. Whatever requirement a bird or a butterfly might have, lizards might not have that. Okay? They will have very different kinds of requirement from their temperature profiles that these animals can tolerate to these rocky landscapes or vegetation cover, all sorts of things. So it's very important to understand and think about what systems we are looking at, what are present in and around the space that we live, and what are their requirements? And can we maintain those basic requirements and connectivity in landscapes for these animals to survive? So these kinds of studies currently, I would say, are very important. And I am also thinking of something like these in the future to go about and try to understand what urban wildlife needs and how urban biodiversity is spaced, what kind of features are needed, how can we maintain those and kind of protect these organisms and live in harmony with them. So this is just a very short thing to show that this was what it looked like around my field site in and around Bangalore, like in and around NCBS, that area where I would capture some of my urban lizards from. And over the years, it has really shifted and most of these plots have vanished and they have been built up. And recently when I went, I found actually, like I would say nothing, like no lizards in and around that area. So that was very concerning and a little sad for me to see them vanish from that. I'll move on to a very different story now and give you a slight glimpse of another very different system, I would say. Generally, when we look at urban ecology, urban wildlife biodiversity, most of the time we listen to talks which are on birds or butterflies or systems which are actually like very colorful, beautiful, even though my lizards were colorful, but very few people would study it in an urban ecosystem. But this other thing are just like very tiny. These are the snails. They are called pond snails. And this is my postdoc work, which I did in Canada. So this is Alberta. This is the kind of landscape that you would see from the city of Calgary, where I was. These are the Rocky Mountains in Canada. And there are lots of these small lakes or ponds in these mountains where we find these pond snails. And this is another system which is found in and around the city of Calgary. They are present inside the city ponds and also just outside within the Rocky Mountains. Okay, very similar kind of like systems found in both kinds of landscapes. And here what the lab at that point in time was studying most of neuroscience. So I shifted a little bit from behavior ecology to try to understand decision making and what happens in the brain, what happens in the minds of these animals, how they are making decisions, how they are surviving. And because all the behaviors also that these animals show are kind of dictated and governed by what is happening in the central nervous system. So I try to look at the environment and cognition, so how different environmental stressors would affect cognition and decision making. So these are the pond snails. They're called Limnia stagnalis. Very basic. They are freshwater gastropods. They are very widely distributed across North America. They are hermaphrodites, so both male, female organs are in the same organism. So they can self-fertilize themselves. They can also mate with each other. They can sometimes be males, sometimes be females, whatever they want to be. Very interesting life cycle. They breathe through something which is called this organ, which comes up. So they can even breathe inside the water, or they can come up and breathe from the air. They sort of sense their surroundings through some nerves. and they would feed by just, so that's their mouth opening and closing. So they will scrape food from any surface and eat. Most of the time they're active, most of like all year round, but during the very like sort of very cold winters in Canada, when completely the water freezes, so it goes to -30, -40 sometimes. But the water level freezes at the top, but at the very bottom, it still stays at 4 degrees. So the snails can survive in that landscape. So what I tried to look at was some of these multiple kinds of stressors in the environment, be it predation, be it heat stress, which is a very important thing right now, be it any other chemical or pollutants that end up in the aquatic systems, which also is a very major factor of like changing aquatic environments in urban spaces. Food availability, their social interaction, all of these, how these stressors sort of change their learning or memory in these animals. And memory processes are very complex. There can be simple associative learnings that you also saw in the lizard, that, okay, it associates something safe. When it goes inside, nothing is there, nothing gets attacked, it associates a spatial cue or some object with the space that, okay, this is a safe refuge, it knows. So something very simple associations. And we have studied associative learning, like very simple in from school days with this experiment on the Pavlov's dog, that you ring a bell and you give the dog food and the dog associates the food with the bell. So if I now ring the bell, the dog salivates because it thinks that there will be food coming. Okay. We all have associative learnings all throughout our life. That's a very basic block. But these animals, they show some higher forms of learning as well, which I will just quickly sort of touch upon and show you. So the temperature in this landscape in Canada changes like this, actually, across the year. The same exact space would look very different across these different seasons. And there would be huge fluctuations in temperature, like 20, 30 degrees odd, even within months and sometimes within days also. So the animals in their natural habitats experience these huge fluctuations in temperature. And what we found was that these animals actually, like, this was a chance discovery, and we found that these animals show a temperature-induced memory formation, which is called the Garcia effect or the sauce bernaise. It came from this term sauce bernaise because the experiment was first done on humans. So if any of us, we eat something new, some novel food, we go out and maybe eat something, and then we fall sick or we get like nausea, we would avoid that food. And we would always associate that because we ate that new food, that is why. If I have never eaten a pizza and I fall sick after having it, I will definitely associate my falling sick with the pizza, not with my dal rice, which I eat every day, okay? And it has to be a new food, okay? Now, it happened with this sauce bernaise or the bernaise sauce from like a scientist who gave this, who discovered this behavior. And that is why it's called sauce bernaise effect, because the man fell sick after having the bernaise sauce. Now, these animals also, the snails, they also fall sick after a heat stress. So if they get a heat shock, they fall sick. And if they eat something before they fall sick, if it is something new, then they avoid that food. Okay, and we tested it out with carrots. So what happened is these snails, they generally eat lettuce, okay, in the lab. And these are all snails which are found in the lab. So the snails are grown in the lab and cultured in the lab. So these snails, they never experience any temperature fluctuation, nothing. They are always maintained at 20 degrees in the lab, very standard day-night cycles, nothing. And if they get a heat stress and they eat carrot before it, which they have never eaten before, they would avoid the carrot in the next 24 hours. And for a snail, 24 hours is a long-term memory, okay? Not short-term. It's not like us. So for a snail, it's a very long-term that they remember something. So we see that happening in these organisms. And we found also that there are some molecules in our bodies which are called heat shock proteins, which help us which sort of spike up when we are stressed. And these proteins are also present all throughout all organisms. We also have it, okay? From the snails to us, all of us have heat shock proteins. When we get stressed, these proteins sort of increase to help us cope with the stress. So we know that animals are getting sick or they're getting stressed and they show this memory. But the ones which are found in nature, like out in the wild, those snails do not show this. They do not get stressed with heat because most probably because they experience these heat fluctuations all the time in their natural environment. So they are able to tolerate it, but not an animal which has never experienced that. Okay? We also tried to sort of mimic these heat fluctuations in the lab and thought we can make these snails tolerate it, but we could not do that. Even a long stress exposure did not make these snails tolerant. It actually made them more sensitive towards heat and they got like more stressed out. So this sort of gives a idea just that for systems, for organisms which have never experienced a new stressor in the environment, they can really get stressed and it can affect multiple forms of memory or cognitive capacities in these systems. The snails are just an example of it, but it can happen to other kinds of organisms as well. Even dealing with novel predators. So these are all the things, all the kinds of stressors that an urban animal will experience, because most of us being humans, we introduce a lot of new species or invasive species in the landscape all the time. And animals which have never experienced it, how will they learn or how will they deal with those stressors then? So we sort of did that same kind of experiment in that landscape as well. There is this crayfish which actually got introduced in that landscape. And there are different lakes, and the crayfish was moving from one lake to the other slowly. And the snails which live in these ponds, they never know what a crayfish is. They have never experienced it. So it's a novel thing for them. And we sort of did this experiment, which is called a configural learning. So the snails experience the food with the predator. If they get a food and a predator, they associate the food with threat. So they again tend to avoid the food. Okay? So they will not eat carrot for some time because it comes with the threat cue. Now, lab animals can actually tolerate it. They know, they understand, or they recognize these crayfish because they come from a system of, like, they come from the population which could recognize crayfish, which comes from Europe, basically. So the lab-bred animals came from a European population. And in that European population, those animals have crayfish in their natural landscape. So they could recognize it. But the ones which are found in Canada, those snails, those wild snails, which do not have crayfish in their environment, they cannot recognize. But some animals which have these predators in their landscape, they can. So slowly, as the crayfish is moving from pond to pond, in some ponds where the animals have crayfish, they can recognize. In the new place, in the new pond where there is no crayfish, those snails cannot. What we wanted to study was that whether these new pond snails, where there is no predators around, how fast can they sort of understand and learn about these crayfish? If something new comes up, can they learn about it? And then can they like sort of adapt and avoid these new predators? So we did some experiments on when they learn, like whether they need that, if only a small exposure during their development, when they are just in their egg stage, is enough for them to recognize these. And we do find that when in a very brief exposure or during their early development time, if we give them the stressor, if a crayfish comes into a pond, they are able to sort of recognize these novel predators and able to adapt and learn about these predators when they turn into adults. So they have that capability to do so. This is the final one that I will talk about. So there is this, like what started happening in Calgary was something was very interesting, basically. So we don't know whether to call it chemical pollution or not. Like I am not very sure whether I can call it that. But fluoride, as we know, it's a very common, like it's a basic inorganic ion that is naturally present in systems. But what started off in North America and especially in Canada, what they were trying to do is that they would put in fluoride in the natural water systems and in the drinking water systems. So all the water that is there in the river systems, that directly comes also as drinking water in our taps that used to come like that, and we would just drink it from there. Now, fluoride is good for dental caries or dental cavities. So children who, while growing up, if they get, like if they brush with fluoride toothpaste or any of these things, then it protects them against cavity formation. And in North America, it's very expensive. Healthcare is super expensive, especially dental. Even in Canada, all the other parts are covered by like normal public healthcare, but dental isn't. So it's very expensive. And that's why what the city thought was they will put fluoride in the water system so that whoever is drinking that water already gives them that protection. Okay? So for the benefit or saving money for healthcare and actually for a good reason maybe, that okay, it will protect from dental cavities, they started putting in fluoride. They plan to put in fluoride actually. They haven't still. It's going on. Maybe it will be done in 2025. And we thought that, okay, now that fluoride has increased in these ponds and these aquatic systems, all the animals there are going to get this. So what effect does that have on these animals? So we gave these animals similar kind of fluoride and sort of saw that it affected their configural learning skills. So they cannot learn. So basically all these snails turned from smart to being dumb. They did not show any learning if they have fluoride in their system. And we also looked at some of the mechanisms by which it happens. You don't have to look at the graphs, but what we found was basically that it affected their genes or the compounds which in the brain are responsible for memory formation, and also some of the compounds which sort of help us in maintaining like sickness states. So those got affected. So the animals became sick and they could not form memory. And a lot of their stressors increased in their systems. And that's what might have led to them being impaired, their memory formation being impaired with fluoride. But that also happened mostly in the lab-bred animals and not in the wild ones. So some of these aspects, the wild animals which have experience over a long generation, long time scale, if they have experience with multiple stresses, they could tolerate it. But the lab animals could not. And it also comes from the fact, again, comes from diversity. If we reduce diversity in organisms, they become less and less tolerant towards many kinds of things. So the more diverse you maintain, more diversity you can maintain, better it is. So I would just want to like sort of end with the fact that, yeah, you see all of these different kinds of animals in and around you, and it might be a good thing if you can think about these systems and try to notice some of these very unnoticeable creatures in and around your landscape. So give it a thought that whether recent times you have seen a lizard, people from Bangalore, have you seen these rock agamas in and around your urban landscape? During my PhD times, like whatever, 12, 15 years, 12 years back, I could see lots of them, but I don't think they are so common right now in the cities. Same goes with snails, same goes with a lot of maybe snakes and amphibians and birds and butterflies. So give a thought that how much of these wildlife and diversity you can notice in and around you, because they are part of the ecosystem that we live in. And why we should care about them? Because it actually affects multiple kinds of systems. It is not just that it's changing them. It also sort of affects us. When we modify the habitat, it affects the pollination or dispersal. It affects nutrient cycling. It affects a lot of primary production that is happening in the ecosystem. There are things about aesthetics and mental health as well, and I won't even go there. But those are also very big part of a urban landscape. When we stay in a city, and where I began from, showing you that beautiful, pristine landscape versus urban city. Even just there are lots of studies now which are looking at how green spaces affect our mental health as well. So multiple aspects of changes that we manipulate in the surroundings, it affects the entire ecosystem, be it at any level, be it at the predator level, be it at the resource-based level, be it connectivity in the landscape, and those affect different kinds of behaviors in animals, their movement, their reproduction, what they are eating, how they are communicating, because we are also changing the physical environment in itself. Maybe the lizards which are using colors, if we change the entire background, what they are using, So their contrast would be very different in the city versus a wide landscape. And animals haven't evolved in those spaces. So we are modifying it, and we are modifying it super fast at a scale where it is difficult for the animals to match up with that speed. So now evolution has to happen also super fast to adapt to these changes in the landscape. And we see it in lots of birds which change their voice, like sort of pitch. They change their songs. Some birds which mimic things, they will now incorporate songs of like a lot of animal made, like sort of human made sounds. So these changes are happening, and they have these huge large scale effects. And maybe you are from very different fields. You can be an ecologist, you can be an urban planner, designer, from NGO, conservationist, any part of the society. We should all just think of how we can contribute in our own way of building and maintaining whatever we have left, how to design the cities to make it better for both us and for them. I would also encourage people to participate in a lot of these citizen science programs that are there right now, and we all contribute to what we see around ourselves. And lots of these platforms now sort of monitor these large-scale urban biodiversity. And the final part is to actually educate and raise awareness and talk about these things. I always like sort of glamorize the lizards a lot because yes, they are colorful, and it is super unique, like the chameleons. So it's good to sometimes also glamorize the systems you are working on and to highlight what it is good at, to make people aware of these things, and also inspire them to look at these beautiful species that are in and around. Because if we protect them, it creates a healthier and harmonious environment for also us, because we are not separate from the systems. That's what I believe. And that's the theme of also urban ecology as a whole. So that's all. I'll end here. Thank you to all of the people who have worked on this. And that's my website. If you want to connect, look at what I do, you can do that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anuradha. That was a really very interesting talk, and you covered so many different aspects related to urban settings. So it was very fascinating, actually, because like very simple changes, like we might even not notice, okay, this is a red lizard, or the back of this lizard is more red than the other. So it's a very small thing for us, but maybe for the lizard, it literally means life and death. So it's a very nice way to look at all these things from from this perspective. So you mentioned that like we are changing the environment very rapidly, and I'm sure all of us agree. But there are also things where, like you spoke about how lizards would require, say, loose soil to maybe bury their or lay their eggs, or rocks to sort of find natural habitats and shelters. So I think it is equally important for humans. So if you think about it, if you are not leaving an inch of open soil, you directly impact your groundwater recharge,
yes, groundwater
your water
recharge.
tables,
Exactly.
everything.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
I think that is what all cities,
Are
especially
struggling
in
with
southern
right now.
India, are struggling
Yes.
right now.
Yes.
Bangalore had a very scary experience earlier this year.
Yes.
And all other cities are going the same way. So
yes.
I think, and this is, I mean, it's very interesting to note that this is not something which we have recently discovered, that groundwater recharge happens. No, it is known for like maybe, I don't know,
ages.
forever. But,
yes.
but we never think of it in that way. So I think integrating different ecological practices and perspectives into designing spaces and planning is something what is the need for the hour.
Yes,
And
absolutely. I
that is,
really
I
like that
think,
point. Yeah, like directly and also indirectly, like for different angles. Like maybe for a conservationist or an ecologist, maybe this is more important. For an urban planner, something else. But the more sort of data and the more stronger we make our case together from different perspectives, that might lead to some change.
Yeah, and even from a conservation point of view, okay, I really like lizards and I should protect their habitat, but I also need water to use, right?
Exactly.
I
Yes.
am not cutting down
Yeah.
my personal water usage,
Mm.
right? So
Yes.
so that is sort of something which we tend to sort of miss due to our
Yes.
disciplinary training and
Yeah.
background. So I think
Yeah.
a more
Yeah.
interdisciplinary way is a very good way.
Yes. Yes.
Also, what I really found nice was you spoke about chemicals and how they can affect very fundamental biological properties of a
Yeah.
species. Like fluoride, which was meant
Yeah.
for human good. I mean,
Yes.
it still is good
Yes.
for
Good.
carries,
But
it
it
solves that issue maybe, but it can have a very different effect on certain
effect
other
on like
species.
yes.
So just wanted to know more about this, that we also have the problem of sort of release of a lot of drugs, pharmaceutical products
Yes.
in our
Yes.
freshwaters.
Absolutely.
Pharmaceutical
And
products are maybe on one end of the spectrum, the other end is detergents.
yes.
And both have been known to
Yes. Like
have very
sulfates. Yeah.
correct.
Like all of those lead to eutrophication. More of like
Yes.
nitrogen, sulfates.
Sulfates, phosphates, all of
Phosphates.
this can
Yes.
have ecosystem-wide impacts.
Yeah.
And like release of drugs or unused or pharmaceutical products
Yes.
into freshwaters can also have any. So
Huge.
so can you
So
like maybe elaborate
yeah,
on
so
that
those
a little bit?
yeah, so those also actually we did look at that. Like some so and right now a lot of studies are actually looking at especially antidepressants. Because that is in the rise right now. As I said, but actually speaking, as we are advancing, we are becoming more like all these stress-related diseases are increasing. So most of the antidepressants are ending up more in the aquatic systems, and they have a very stronger half-life. So they stay active for a very long time in the water bodies, and it is changing these animals' behavior and their physiology. So all of these anxiety and depression drugs, actually, they are also making the animals like all similar. How I was saying that they all become like reactive as a phenotype. Uh, these antidepressants also making them somewhat similar, and it affects their learning, memory, like large scale impacts on reproduction, because they sort of offset a lot of like reproductive abilities. They affect the immune system. So there are actually studies right now which are looking at these things, especially in the aquatic system. So in fishes and invertebrates.
Yeah, because I think generally freshwater systems are
Yeah,
not
they're
at
highly
all given the importance they
no, they're
deserve.
not. Yes, yes.
And actually, it's very apt that you pointed so many of these stressors. And obviously, when
Yes.
we are studying them, we study them in isolation.
Mhm.
But in nature or in the real world, they all act at the same time.
Yes.
So it was actually very important to understand the sort of response to a novel threat or a novel environmental change, how the animals give. But I was curious to know, in the case of multiple stressors acting at the same time, do you find any difference in these responses? Like,
Yes, we do actually.
okay.
So, so some people sometimes actually multiple stressors can lead to a higher sort of stress level, where so the stress axis is kind of like an opposite U shape, and single stresses sometimes are actually good. How I said, like sometimes a little bit of stress is good. So most of the time, little bit of predatory stress is actually good for the animals. They become much more alert, and that helps them to learn and memorize things even in their environment, other things. But if I combine the predatory stress with a heat or a pollutant, then actually it goes overboard, sort of. So it creates, the load goes much more higher up, and then it affects all of their cognitive skills. And again, like reproduction, as stress go high, what happens is once we are in that chronic stress or very high stress mode, we stop all of these other processes, like like okay, eating would be less, reproduction is then a secondary thing to think about, immune systems go down. So all of these are affected, and it happens to us as well, like when
Yeah,
we are
sure.
stressed. Yes, so very similar things are affected.
Yeah, I think that also explains a lot of things which we find in our say urban rivers or ponds, that you have chemical discharge, you also have non-native species,
Yes.
you have temperature changes, and
Change.
so on. So you do find very drastic declines in
Yes,
populations, and maybe this
exactly.
could be like sort
Yeah.
of the larger
Yes.
picture behind it.
Yes.
So I'll just go over some questions in the Q&A box now. So the one question is, when the agama was observed in the lab, did it show rapid color changes as it was taken from its natural environment, considering that the stress bringing it to lab might be high?
Yes. Yeah, that's true. So what we do is we keep the animals in like to acclimate to the lab for some days, so that it is not immediately like it's sort of accustomed to the lab. But still, uh, it might still take a little more time. But what here we were looking at is more of like, even from the urban and from the rural, what is the relative change? What relatively, if somebody's faster or slower, both are experiencing the same kind of stressor by bringing in the lab setting. And it is not very different. So even if I observe it on field, just how fast they are changing, and if I observe it in the lab, it might be a slight difference in like within seconds, but it still falls in the larger range of the time. So some lizards might take like 5 seconds, some might take 30 seconds to attain that color. So that individual difference is always there. And even when we get them to the lab, they all fall in that range. So it is not like they will take a really long time. So it's kind of, they get acclimated, and they do show those changes.
Okay. So the next question again, talking about agamas, is do they undergo reactive? Do they show reactive phenotypes under lab conditions? The rural agamas.
Okay. Not really, no. Because all of this is also measured in the lab, like the hormonal profiles. They are all measured in the lab. I cannot really do it. It's hard to do it on field to get that continuous thing. So those are measured in the lab. In terms of how they show aggression, all of those are actually measured in the lab, the behaviors. So no, they do have that, like whatever phenotype they are showing, if they are proactive and bold and high testo, low cot, it sort of holds even in during the lab setup, because it's a very short time that they are brought in the lab. So it's like 7 to 10 days and they are released back. So I don't think that's enough time for them to, if they are plastic, actually. So here are two things also here in this question. If the rural animals and the urban animals do they both have the same repertoire of change? Like, are they plastic enough to show from reactive to proactive phenotype? And are they like sort of adjusting dust in the environment? Or is it a different genotype completely? Now, that has happened in the urban-rural population. So that we don't really know. Like if I keep a rural animal in the urban setting for a very long time, will it shift? Can it shift to a reactive phenotype? I don't know.
Right. Yeah. I think that was the next question which was there. Like, did you try switching the urban and rural lizards between habitats to test if their color changes?
Yeah. No, we don't.
That
We did not. You need like really big then enclosures, and it's I think there's lots of ethical permits that needed to actually do these very large scale experiments. Hard to do those in India, I would say.
Yes, that is also
like
true.
getting those. Yeah.
And I mean, it is like a fair point that you will have certain sort of regulations which you will also need to.
Yes, I cannot just.
Obey. Yeah. So then there was another question about if the garden lizard can we expect a similar case as you see with rock agamas?
Yes. Right. So calotes, like the garden lizards, they also change color, and so they do change colors, and they are also found across urban, rural, and they are also agamids. So that's what I was saying, that we in India have lots of agamids which show very nice and very dynamic color change, and we haven't really studied them. So we looked at some of the calotes also in one of the other work. And yes, but we haven't compared like across these landscapes or different populations. Yeah.
Right. But you would expect that
I would expect there would be, yes, very soon. Yes, I would expect that.
So then there is does the inability of urban rock agamas to attend the bright red colors affect their ability to attract mates?
Yeah, so I also had that question in my
Okay.
mind, but I would say like what we found was that what is happening in the urban space, as I said, like they are all like sort of packed in a small area, right? So maybe they don't have many options. So you are stuck with who you have, kind of, but it does not compromise your uh, courtship or your mating opportunities because there are females in that landscape and because you are very closely spaced. So your communication is happening at a closer range now, not at a huge range. And yes, you don't have much choice, but they still just, yeah, whoever they are present around with, they just mate with them. That's all. If you're stuck in an island, you are limited in choice. It's like that. Whatever you got, make the best of that.
Right. And so basically there were no behavioral changes or anything in the
they
females,
do.
or like, did you say they do have?
So we did not measure the females, but like measured the females, I would say receptivity of like whether they would like more of a brighter male or a dull male would do. Like in the sense an urban female, will she still have the preference for a brighter male?
Correct.
If I give the choice. So that we haven't actually measured.
And I think that would also be, I mean, a very long-term kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
Like if they
yes.
actually have some genetic evolution happening,
Yes,
then it could
exactly.
probably lead to that.
Yes, yeah.
Well, I remember there was some experiment with tails of some fish, and
Yes,
the
they would
females
attach
of
the tails
certain
or
fish
like,
kept,
yes,
correct,
yes, yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So the next question is, like you said that the snails undergo stress if exposed to new predators. Is it also true for lizards?
Yes, obviously, I would think so. And especially that's why I think in the urban spaces, their basic stress level baselines are really high. Because they do have like feral dogs, cats, which do attack, like we have observed on field. It is not just birds or snakes, but yeah, dogs, cats, they all the time they attack these lizards, which are not really present in the natural ecosystem, like the wild.
And also, I mean, that also is very interesting because the snail which you spoke about, Limnia, is a resident of, say, Canadian thing. But a species of Limnia is now becoming invasive in Indian freshwater systems.
Yes, yes.
So how these things are actually linked, it's a very nice way to actually, it opens up so many questions.
Yes.
So there is also a question on, have you studied effects of microplastics on any of these species, or like any
I
responses?
haven't. Yeah, I haven't. But it is so some of the undergrad students in Canada are studying that right now, actually, microplastic effects on like cognition. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I don't know what they have got, but they have started studying. I know that.
And there is one more question about the chemicals part. Like, what would you say of synergistic effects of human released chemicals in, say, aquatic systems, and how would you monitor their effects?
So I would say these all need a little long-term monitoring. Right now, all the studies which I talked about are very like, short-term timescapes. And what I even spoke about the snails actually is that sometimes, and we did some of those experiments, if they experience these changes, be it any chemical stressor, be it temperature changes, any of these things, if given a long enough time, sometimes during development, if they have that capacity, I would say in a certain range, they are actually very flexible and they can adapt to these changes. So whatever genes get switched on or off are different if they experience it throughout their development till their adulthood. And it is different from the snails which do not experience it and there is just an acute stressor. So what we are sort of measuring is just that one single time point and maybe when that chemical also has come into the system, how long those survive. So a long-term monitoring of these things actually give a better perspective. And I would suggest that, like for all us researchers who work in that field, we should start looking at like long-term studies,
Yeah.
because that's
Yeah.
what is sort of missing in that link also of like changes
Yes.
in human-made stuff in the behavior and large-scale ecosystem function changes. We can only capture
Exactly.
those if
Yeah.
there are long-term data sets. We are not able to
Yeah.
capture any of these things. We look at short-term. We
Right.
say yes, they are affected, but maybe they can adapt to these changes in the long term. Some of these, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, at least I know of a bunch of examples from zooplankton, which are even
Hmm.
smaller,
Hmm.
adapting very well to changes in pH caused by, say, industrial revolution, and
Yes,
that
yes,
kind of
yes,
scale.
yes.
So that is like definitely we need the
Hmm.
long term part. Secondly, we also need the scale.
Yes,
So
yeah.
experiment or study which we do at a lab
Hmm.
scale will typically
Hmm.
involve small volume
Yes,
and a fixed
yes,
concentration which doesn't
definitely.
change over time.
Hmm.
But in, say, a stream, there is a release of a
It's a
pollutant. It
yeah.
will
Have a
peak at some
gradient.
point and then
Yes,
it will dissipate.
yeah, exactly.
So these all can have very
Yeah,
complicated effects, and
absolutely.
answering with a pinpoint precision is
No,
very
it's
difficult.
yes.
So I think we just need to sort of pool in knowledge we get from multiple lab
Mm-hmm.
studies and
Mm-hmm.
piece things together what might be happening
Yeah. And
in
I
natural
would say
system.
some studies, some things we can even look at the wild, basically.
Correct.
Like
Yeah.
just go to, like do those studies on wild systems and have like maybe simple measures which can be done quickly on site.
Yeah.
And then have that over a longer time scale. And that's what we are also thinking. Even in Canada now, the lab is
Hmm.
sort of shifting.
Hmm.
So when I joined, we started thinking of all like ecological stuff. It was a complete
Right.
neuroscience lab.
Right.
And then I was like, no, let's bring in some ecology in this. So we started shifting it to more of like understanding wild snails, how
Right.
they are different.
Right.
And now we're planning on doing things on field. So in those ponds,
Hmm.
how things are changing, how it is happening.
Right.
So,
Correct. Yeah. And again, so just like with predators, can a lack of the usual food or introduction of new food cause stress in either species?
yes, lack of food, definitely. What
Mm.
lack of food does is, like in terms of cognition, I can say, of course, lack of food will change your like all sorts of things in your body.
Right.
But just for your brain, also sometimes what we saw in the snails was if I make it learn about something, maybe a predator or whatever, and I food deprive it, it just cannot access the memory. So what happens in terms of like lack of food is that our memory gets blocked. Uh,
Mm.
it does happen for, I don't know if there are students, like at least even when we were students,
Yeah,
before an
me
exam, I keep saying
specifically.
you should eat, do not skip meals, because your brain needs
Yeah.
that glucose. So even if you know the answer, you're not going to remember it while writing. But once you go out later, it will come back to you. So that's something that actually happens with food
Mm.
deprivation.
Okay.
The memory block happens. So the memory is blocked. You cannot access it. But
Mm.
you have learned about it. So
Right.
that happens in a lot of animal systems,
Yeah.
that memory block.
Yeah, and just to add to it, the point about novel food and these things.
Mm,
So I think in the previous talk, Purbi also spoke about something similar, that species are using non-native plants
mm,
or
mm.
trees or fruits as the
Yes,
predominant food source in
yes,
some cases.
yeah.
So
It,
there is this sort of learning and switching which will be there
yes.
happening.
But it
Yeah,
will also have then large, like
correct,
sort of
correct.
long-term trophic
Long term.
level effects.
Yes,
Yeah, like
yes.
trophic
Eventually, it
cascades
will
would,
lead to that.
yeah, it will lead to
Correct.
like changes in the trophic cascade in itself.
Yes. Okay. And the last question, now we have spoke about so much thing. Now it comes to the
Mm.
policy. So is there any policy or urban wildlife act that addresses protection of habitats for species like lizards, and how can civil society contribute to safeguarding them?
I don't think there is right now any urban specific policy,
Yeah.
urban wildlife specific thing. Uh, but I would say that still more of citizen-led initiatives are coming up in every space, be it like for habitat destruction and like in Pune, I can say
Yeah.
that like we have a very nice sort of landscape. It's a slight hilly hillock kind of a landscape, and there was a proposition of making a road around that to sort of bifurcate the traffic and all of that. But a lot of citizens protested against it, and it's kind of stalled. So those kinds of things keep on happening. Like if enough of the people are aware, and then these level of changes can be actually like sort of happen on ground to protect certain landscapes. Like even in Bangalore, I would say, like right now, I think now they are actually doing a lot of these lake revivals after the event of like, so it required that huge sort of like a pain point that came up, and then suddenly you wake up and say that, no, we have to sort of come and protect these systems.
It still remains to be seen that what sort of ecological consequences the current revivals have. So that's the next decade or so we'll find out more about that. And secondly, just to add to what you said about the contribution of society. So one thing is society also has a like sort of bunch of people who do research in different places. But the problem is when you start looking at specific cities. So I was actually doing something with Pune like some time ago. The amount of gaps in data is in like you can't imagine. There is no data. Everyone thinks that oh we know this already, but when you actually try to find it, it's never there.
No.
So publishing these local city level data sets, sharing this out is very important because the next set of people, like maybe the planners or the activists or other people, they can use this to leverage their claims or strengthen their sort of protest or other things. So that is the way we can contribute to this thing.
Yes, absolutely. That's why citizen science data sets and portals
is
now
really
become,
important.
it's very important. And I feel it's a very good initiative that has picked up right now, I would say. Like today
and
only
a
I was
lot of
attending
ecologists are
a part of
using
it
that now.
Using that data set.
Yes, that's
and slowly
extremely.
once, if we build up this like sort of network amongst us all from different perspectives, like from different fields, from policy and from design also. Like urban design is like such an important field right now, like urban environment sustainability design. And I saw a lot of other places like abroad, they have these things like they do also because they are less populated. As it's a big challenge for us in India that our cities are actually super dense and we have a very high population. So we have to balance all of those factors in, but still it is worthwhile a try to sort of connect it.
Also less species abroad.
Exactly, there it's like less species. Exactly, we have too much diversity. What will you
so
protect?
What all you protect?
Exactly. So that is also very important. Like if we map it across different trophic levels of functional importance of species in the landscape, like which to protect, which require more important to be. So all of those have to come together.
Okay, so there are only two questions. We'll just take this quickly. Can the lizards cope with new prey species when their habitats are changed?
I would say these lizards can. They eat pretty much anything and everything what fits in their mouth. So some of them, they're very generalist. So it depends on the species. Like different animals have, like some are very generalist. They will feed on more or less everything, whatever they get. Some are very specific. So then it's difficult for those animals then, specialists, to survive when foods or resources change.
And then there is a question about how loss of fluorine affects the snail's cognitive ability, but can excess of fluorine do the same thing?
Fluoride?
Okay. Yeah, I mean.
Okay. So yeah, I didn't hear. That's fine. So you're saying less of fluoride can just come?
Yeah. So the snail's cognitive abilities were affected by less availability of fluorine.
No, it was affected by actually excess.
Excess, because they were adding
it. They were adding it. Exactly. So if they are low in fluoride, nothing happens to them. So because we grow them in the lab without any fluoride, we don't add fluoride to the water and they're absolutely fine. So it's the addition that creates a disbalance. But they can still adjust to a slight bit of addition if they develop in that. But at a higher scale, fluoride does affect a lot of aquatic systems. Okay, this I'm talking about a very low level, like it's very minimal. But after a certain point, it actually acts as like it affects all systems and they die. It's toxic basically. Exactly. So
Okay, so I think we have covered all the questions in the chat box, plus had a good discussion. So I'll just hand it over to Pradeep from our IHS library team. So he just introduced the exhibition. And before that, thank you so much, Anuradha,
Thank you so much.
for this very nice talk. Yeah, Pradeep.
Hi, thank you so much, Anuradha and Mihir, for putting all the discussions together. And am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, to those of you who are here for the first time, my name is Pradeep, and my colleagues are here on the panel, put together this exhibition with Bengaluru Sustainability Forum. And we have a public reference library in the IHS Bangalore City campus. It's open to public, walk-ins are allowed. The exhibition, which is organizing the series of the webinars that we are part of right now, have an exhibition open until December end, 24th. Please do stop by if you're around, and we have quite a few resources that we have curated, including subject guides that I've just messaged in the group. And we've been open to public since 2014. The library was started in 2012. We have quite few resources, multidisciplinary, on different subjects and areas, including urban ecology, where IHS works. And we are a and those of you who are here for the first time, the IHS is a national education institution. Um, uh, we offer an urban fellowship program of 9 months, which is underway in Bangalore, and we work and ask questions about urban inquiries, theory, pedagogy, and so on. Yeah. Could the colleagues, Vinita, somebody from BSF, could introduce and
Sure. Thanks, Pradeep. Thanks a lot, Anuradha, for such a really fascinating talk, and Mihir for, leading the conversation. So just to quickly introduce BSF, we are a multi-institutional initiative. We're about 6 years old, and we were set up with the coming together of NCBS, Wipro Foundation, IIHS, Science Gallery, Bengaluru, Biome, and Azim Premji University. And what we really try and do is to bring conversations and collaborations around sustainability to various stakeholders in the city. And this library exhibition was one such collaboration, that it emerged as a very chance conversation and has now evolved, I think, 5 months later into this. And we've had a really nice working with the IHS library team and with Mihir. The range of our engagements at BSF is quite a diverse spectrum. In that sense, we offer retreats, webinars, panel discussions, film festivals, podcasts, and we have a small grants program as well. I would urge all of you to look at our website for more information. And yeah, look forward to more such webinars like this. Thank you.
So thanks a lot, Vinita and Pradeep. I think we can end the session. So thank you, Anuradha, for the talk and taking the time for sharing this with us. Also, thanks to Abhishek from NCBS, who has been helping with the technical part of this, managing this webinar, and
Thank you, sir.
all my colleagues. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so
Thanks.
much. Bye.
Thank you.
See you in the
Thank you.
next session.
thanks,
Yeah. Bye.
thanks everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye.